Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not introducing a collection of spine-tingling tales, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies. I'm back, baby, and better than ever. In today's vid, I'll be covering a horror anthology, but not just any simple horror anthology. 1982's Creepshow, directed by the late great George Romero and written by legendary author Stephen King. One of the greatest collaborations in horror history. Though, admittedly, if it was the other way around, and Romero wrote the film and Stephen King directed it, well, it'd probably be a total shitfest. Now, Creepshow isn't just a grand meeting of the minds, but also a loving tribute to what got Romero and King into horror to begin with as kids. One of their biggest influences, EC Comics, publisher of illustrious horror comics through the 40s and 50s, like The Haunt of Fear, The Vault of Horror, and chief among them, Tales from the Crypt, starring the Crypt Keeper, who you'd know best as that lovable, ghoulish puppet from the HBO series. But in the comics, he kinda just looked like an old homeless dude just a few moments away from asking for change. Now, there were British film adaptations of both Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror made in the 70s before Creepshow came along, but honestly, Creepshow is a far more faithful adaptation of the original comics in style and tone, and all the way down to the fucking font. Like any other anthology worth watching, Creepshow features wraparound segments, a prologue and epilogue in particular, tying the whole film together. In this case, the prologue and epilogue concerns a young reader of the film's titular comic book, Creepshow. The boy is named Billy and was played by Stephen King's actual son Joe, known today by his pseudonym Joe Hill. Billy's plight is that his father, played by the great Tom Atkins, disapproves of his son reading not only comics, but fucking horror comics, which is usually the thing overprotective mothers do. But, you know, Stephen King's a big fan of dads being dicks because his father abandoned him. Funny trivia there. Well, I guess maybe it's not that funny, really. I do have to say that Tom Atkins' wife in this movie might be the only time he's ever been paired with an actress that's actually age-appropriate. I'm looking at you, Halloween 3 in the Fog. Now, the father's prejudice against comics is evocative of the feeling parents had toward the medium during the height of EC Comics' popularity in the 50s.
I got some garbage I want to throw away.
Comics, particularly horror comics, became the latest thing blamed for the corruption of the youth of that era, thanks in no small part to the work of psychiatrist Frederick Werdum, the author of Seduction of the Innocent, a damning tome critical of the comics medium. I mean, there were actual fucking Senate hearings that sought to determine definitively whether or not Batman and Robin were gay. Really serious stuff, and come on, of course they were gay. You don't need a fucking Senate commission to figure it out, guys. The moral panic against comics eventually led to the introduction of the Comics Code Authority, which basically meant the government censored comics and limited freedom of speech in yet another medium. So Batman and Robin got girlfriends, and horror comics like Tales from the Crypt were made virtually impossible to publish for many, many years. EC Comics sadly went under, and its publisher focused its attention on making the satirical magazine mad. But, of course, today everyone except Bill Maher loves comics. The Comics Code Authority is a thing of the past, and not a single issue of Batman is released without an extended scene where Batman graphically fucks Robin. Or so I've heard. The story of the prologue and epilogue is pretty basic stuff, but the parent hating horror comics enough to go outside and toss one in the garbage does get across the historical hatred the medium garnered back in the day, and the child angry at his father over this act works as a pretty good framing device for the tales. As the host of the Creepshow comic, the Creep is summoned and just kinda looks at Billy through the window. Okay, I guess he kinda is a creep. The Creep, a Crypt Keeper surrogate, really does look a lot like what the Crypt Keeper would look like in HBO's Tales from the Crypt. Looking like a decrepit, hooded, flying, I don't know, ghost zombie. Really cool, but I feel like he's a bit of a missed opportunity since he doesn't actually speak in this movie or physically introduce each segment. The segments in this anthology film are presented through the trashed comic, and you can see the Creep introduce each segment in panels, but in order to read his ghoulish intros, you gotta pause the movie. I mean, the flick is 2 hours long, so they probably didn't want to spend too much time on a host guy, but I just would've liked to see a bit more personality extended to the creep. The film even has some slick animated comic transitions between segments. Those could have featured more of the creep. It's the one thing I think the sequel improved, the animated wraparounds, even though the creep kinda looked like shit. Now, besides the comic style approach, each segment of Creepshow is standalone. There's no overarching story, no characters crossing over into other segments, no major overriding themes, nothing fancy like that. Honestly, this is fine. Each segment feels like its own unique short horror film with a star-studded cast, and if you don't like one segment, well, maybe the next one will be better. There's a good variety of different kinds of horror stories present, and because of that, the 2-hour runtime composed of 5 segments really flies by. Let's break down each segment, shall we? Now, I must warn you, there's gonna be some spoilers peppered throughout this review, but hey, this flick's nearly 40 years old, I'm sorry. Breaking this video up into 5 spoiler sections is just too tedious. The first segment is titled Father's Day and features a young Ed Harris in an early minor role. The plot concerns a wealthy family getting together for their annual family reunion on Father's Day. And like at every family reunion, everybody's an asshole and they all hate each other.
Pass those scones, Cass. You're such a hog.
Aunt Sylvia is savage as fuck. Now, this is Father's Day, but the family patriarch is absent and has been for many years. He's fucking dead. As the backstory goes, Old Man Grantham just wanted some fucking cake, and his forever alone daughter, Bedelia, just up and bashes the guy's head in like she's Mrs. White in the billiard room with the candlestick. Well, I guess in Bedelia's defense, her dad did kill her fiancé, but you could still let the asshole have some cake before he dies. Jesus. Aunt Bedelia arrives late to the dead father's day get-together and decides to visit her pop at his plot to pay her respects.
You bootlegger! Killer murder!
Or I guess drunkenly berate his corpse. And I don't know, I suppose maybe because she dropped her bottle of Jim Beam on the grave, Old Man Grantham comes back as a zombie. That's the only explanation I can come up with for why he didn't do this at any point before now. Bedelia's pop doesn't really seem to be pissed that she killed him so much as he wants his overdue cake, and the zombie chokes a bitch when she doesn't deliver. Dude was being patient. Father's Day is one of Creepshow's shorter segments and is probably the most basic. It's a pretty traditional tale of an undead figure wanting revenge against some assholes. A tale commonly found published by EC Comics. It really is just as cut and dry as a shambling zombie killing some folks because he didn't get his cake, much like Amy Schumer, which is fine. It's not often you get to see Ed Harris crushed to death by a tombstone, but the segment has a lot of exposition and setup for just a little bit of payoff. I feel like Father's Day is the weakest segment overall, but it does get across the EC Comics feel right from the get-go.
I got my cake.
The second segment is the most lighthearted tale, The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, which was based on a King short story titled Weeds. The notable thing about this segment that makes it special is that Stephen King, for some reason, is the only real actor in it, playing the titular Jordy Verrill. It is fucking wild. Jordy, as played by King on all of the cocaine you can possibly imagine, is a dumb hick living in the sticks, who witnesses a meteorite crash near his farm. It's kinda weird how he was just standing there before it even happened.
Holy old Jesus!
Jordy aims to make a quick buck off this meteorite by, selling it to the local college for exactly $200 to pay off his bank loan.
How does $50 sound?
Not a cent less than $200.
75.
200. Anita Verrill didn't raise no idiots.
God, Jordy is a master at persuasion. Jordy decides to take the meteorite wrangling into his own hands by, taking it into his own hands, at first touching this cosmic body that just flew through Earth's atmosphere, and then, when that doesn't work, cooling it off with some water. However, the water ends up shattering the meteorite, ruining its resale value at the imagined Department of Meteors.
I wouldn't give you 2 cents.
Unbeknownst to the ignorant Mr. Verrill, the meteorite isn't just some space rock worth exactly $200, but an actual extraterrestrial entity that aggressively spreads plant life, and it gradually makes Jordy's front yard look like Willie Nelson's garden. That's not all, though, as Jordy begins to transform into a plant-slash-human hybrid after his direct exposure to the meteorite, looking like Chewbacca fucked the Grinch. The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill is the most overtly comedic segment of Creepshow, and is much heavier on sci-fi than it is horror.
No. No, 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 no.
What makes this segment, honestly, is Stephen King's performance, which isn't very good, admittedly. It's like he got acting tips from Jim Varney, but it's a hoot seeing an iconic horror author play a backwoods redneck, ham it up, and say meteor shit.
Meteor shit!
It's a pretty hilarious performance, especially considering that this is a one-man show based on a Stephen King story starring fucking Stephen King. Eat your heart out, John Cusack. I actually find it kinda ironic that the one role Stephen King plays himself is not one of the famous writer characters he puts in his books. Geordie is the furthest thing away from one of King's stock protagonists, but still, it's hard not to see that dorky-looking New England nerd underneath the yokel exterior.
I wonder how much they'd pay for it up to college.
The only other actor in this segment, Bingo O'Malley, by the way, great name, only ever appears in Geordie's fantasies as the head of the Department of Meteors, a sinister doctor, and eventually, Geordie's actual father.
You might as well sign your death warrant.
Wow, Geordie's dad is a real Renaissance man. Ultimately, Geordie, covered in the alien weeds, resigns himself to suicide out of fear of Cheech and Chong driving by in their van. The third segment is titled Something to Tide You Over, and surprisingly, this is the only segment with a pun name. Wow. Now, this segment is sure to give away that this is the 80s. Ted Danson is visited at his apartment by Leslie Nielsen, who promptly berates Danson for how he treats his VCR. That is just an 80s sentence right there.
Well, you really should take better care of this equipment.
Now, keep in mind, this film was shot before Cheers aired, and came out long before Leslie Nielsen played basically the same character in countless 90s parodies. So this segment isn't gonna be no laugh fest.
You know damn well who I am, so let's not play any games, huh?
Leslie Nielsen calmly reveals that he's aware of his wife Rebecca's affair with Ted Danson, and is none too pleased with being cucked, especially by Ted Danson. That shit has gotta sting. So, Leslie Nielsen has something real bad cooked up for Becky, and if Ted Danson doesn't cooperate and go on a little trip, Nielsen might do something drastic, like putting a copy of 2001: A Space Travesty into the VCR.
That would be fine with me.
Yeah, and then you'll never know. And believe me, Mr. Truelove, you want to know.
So, Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen go on a little drive by the shore. Oh boy, what I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall for this entire trip. The duo are headed to a private beach called Comfort Point.
Now, this is Comfort Point. I call my beach house Comfort Station. Is that camp or kitsch, Harry? That's stupid.
Hey, don't be a dick, Ted Danson. Nielsen leads Danson to the shore where a shovel awaits. Huh, you know, that's kinda weird. Aw, shit. Yeah, honestly, you probably shouldn't trust the guy whose wife you fucked to take you to an isolated location and not just murder you. I mean, really, Ted. Well, Nielsen actually buries Ted Danson in the sand, up to his head, with the tide slowly crawling in. Now, Leslie Nielsen doesn't intend to leave his prey dying without entertainment, and brings out a TV in front of Ted with the longest cable ever that plays Ted's stolen love Becky dying the same way on the other line. Aw, man, this was Twitch back in the 80s. Speaking of which, follow my Twitch, twitch.tv/Dr. Wolfula. Shameless plug, I know, so sue me. Man, though, this situation is some 007 shit. Is Leslie Nielsen a Bond villain on the side? Something to Tide You Over is probably my favorite Creepshow segment. Even if there was no supernatural elements involved, being trapped in sand as a tide comes in and slowly drowns you is a scary concept on its own. I also enjoy the performances of Ted Danson and especially Leslie Nielsen, who's great as this petty, laid-back, and old-fashioned villain.
Yell all you want, Harry. Comfort Point is very private. I own it all.
Help! Help! Help!
Help!
It makes me wish the guy got some more varied roles before he passed, because he made for a pretty good, serious antagonist. Though, one issue with the segment is, well, Ted Danson and Becky come back as zombies and seek revenge, which wouldn't be a problem if the first segment wasn't also that. It's a little repetitive, and I kind of feel like the first segment could have gotten cut, honestly. Something to Tide You Over is just a better incarnation of the idea. Maybe George Romero was really just pushing for as many zombies as possible. I kind of wonder why.
If you can hold your breath, if you can hold your breath.
The penultimate segment is simply titled The Crate, an adaptation of King's short story of the same name. A janitor at a college discovers, well, a crate. A crate more than a century old from an Arctic expedition, and the guy enlists the help and authority of Professor Stanley to pop the sucker open and see what's inside. Ooh, I hope it's a big green egg! In actuality, within the crate is a bloodthirsty monster that's honestly probably pissed about being stuck in a box for over 100 years. The monster devours the janitor and is on the loose, moving about in its crate like Solid Snake is a hermit crab, continuing its killing spree and leaving Professor Stanley kinda culpable for these killings.
Oh, I think I'm crazy now. You think that I killed him? Look at the blood, look.
The Crate, like its title, is pretty simple. A monster in a crate is on the loose, and I kinda wonder how this monster was silent in a crate for over 100 years without anything to eat. The thing that mixes up the segment and makes it a bit more interesting is Professor Stanley's colleague, Professor Northrop, who believes Stanley's claim of a monster on the loose.
Am I going crazy, Henry? No.
In fact, Northrop intends to take advantage of the situation. You see, Henry Northrop has an obnoxious wife played by the otherwise delicious Adrienne Barbeau. Adrienne Barbeau is a blabbermouth and a drunk, always talking shit.
They don't know what they're doing.
Early on in the segment, Henry imagines himself publicly killing his wife to applause. I bet Phil Spector was hoping to get the same reaction. Henry repeatedly imagines killing his wife and takes the loose monster as an opportunity to get his wife dead without consequence, giving Dr. Stanley a roofie to get him out of the way, and luring his wife to her untimely demise, especially since she's like 20 years younger than her husband. The Crate is, honestly, overall, my least favorite segment. It's the longest segment at about 40 minutes, and it's just a bit of a drag. The Crate monster is cool and all, but it's not all that worth it watching all the setup leading to the predictable outcome. The segment doesn't even really have a satisfying ironic ending. Henry just gets his wife killed and dumps the crate monster into a river. Stanley catches wind of Henry's killings and is just okay with it, but, you know, the monster of course gets out. Why couldn't it do that in the last 150 years? I don't know, usually these stories have some clear-cut consequences, but in this case, it's just really ambiguous. I mean, aren't people going to be a little suspicious of Adrienne Barbeau's disappearance? Next time I watch Creepshow, I'll probably skip this segment. It's not terrible, it's just kinda dull. The final segment is titled, They're Creeping Up on You, about a miserly Scrooge-like businessman named Upson Pratt, who lives isolated in a sterile New York apartment. Pratt's apartment is pretty fucking futuristic, automated and minimal like Steve Jobs jizzed all over the place, and Pratt himself is a total neat freak germaphobe.
There's not gonna be any more damn bugs.
Here's where the irony comes in. Pratt's apartment gradually becomes infested by roaches for no apparent reason during an eventual blackout. Gross, but deserved. Pratt lives in a prison of his own design.
You will have no job by midnight tonight, do you understand me? And then next year you can take the wife and kids to Disney World on your fucking welfare check.
He's a crude man and an evil, almost diabolically so, businessman who takes pleasure in the downfall of a competitor who commits suicide.
Now we won't have to offer the old fart a seat on the board of directors.
Pratt even mocks the man's widow over the phone.
George Genron told me old Norman went out with a bang.
How many men have you destroyed? How many men have you killed, you monster?
Only the stupid ones.
Also, the dude might be kinda racist, too.
I might be able to get Pirelli Brothers out here by,
shall we say, 11:30?
You might go far, White.
I've noticed that in service jobs, people like yourself often do. People of color.
Man, where are some 3 ghosts when you need them? Well, I guess a million bugs is the next best thing. They're Creeping Up on You is the grossest segment of Creepshow. I mean, it's about a shitload of roaches, but it's also a pretty good, memorable way to cap off the flick. Apparently, some of the roaches are actually just raisins, but the thing that makes the segment are the damn bugs. This segment doesn't rely on fancy effects to get its point home, just a lot of real fucking bugs that are gross as hell. The late E.G. Marshall is also really great in the segment as the asshole businessman Upson Pratt, essentially performing alone in a room filled with bugs. Deserved an Oscar for that, Even though there's very little tying each tale together, all the segments do have a really good old-school horror feel with amazing eerie lighting and, oh boy, the fog. Gotta love it. The film even extends its comic gimmick into the live-action segments. Certain key moments will receive over-the-top horror comic lighting that's vividly colorful. Frequent Romero collaborator Tom Savini provided the effects for Creepshow, even making a cameo, and it goes without saying, Savini did a great job putting together the horrific visuals, but he also made comic-style graphics, and while they're a bit crude-looking today, they do lend the film a unique, authentic comic look that no other film really captures. Really, I gotta hand it to Romero's, King's, and Savini's shared devotion to paying tribute to the comics of their youth. Creepshow really does feel like a Tales from the Crypt issue brought to life. The film is a labor of love. It has some flaws, it could have used some cuts, and some segments are stronger than others, but really, it's a highly enjoyable tribute to a lost era of comics. I give Creepshow $200 out of Meteor shit. Not a cent less. If you like this video, be sure to like it, but if you loved it, make sure to subscribe to me, Dr. Wolfula. Oh, and keep in touch with me on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Dr. Wolfula. Be sure to also help support the channel in any way you can, especially by donating to my Patreon, where you can keep up with me, get exclusive content, and talk to me directly. Finally, I have some new merch available on TeePublic, so if you'd like to wear some Dr. Wolfula or even goulash swag, head on down there. Of course, the channel wouldn't be possible without all the support I've gotten from my fans on Patreon, and I'd like to thank these folks for helping me make this happen. It really is an honor to make content for so many swell people, and I hope to do you guys proud in the future. Wow, there are a lot of people in these credits. I must be popular. Thanks to all of you once again from your old pal, Dr. Wolfula.